A gust of wind blows over a tree, the tree falls onto a power line, and a neighborhood is plunged into darkness. Inside one house, the constant hum of a 750-pound machine goes quiet. The woman inside the 7-foot-long metal tube stops breathing. Her parents hold their breath, waiting to hear the sound of their home's backup generator start up. And after a moment of terrible silence, they realize the generator isn't coming on. They rush to grab the hand pump and hurriedly connect it to the machine that has been keeping their daughter alive since she was 3 years old. Desperately, they try to manually force the air through the machine to get their daughter breathing again, but to no avail. After almost spending 60 years fighting for her life inside a metallic prison, Diane Odell was killed by a simple power outage. And ever since the day you heard word of her death, the thought that this very thing could happen to you has always been in the back of your mind. And now, as you lay alone in the silent darkness of your very own power outage, all you can do is wait and hope that someone will come before the machine that has kept you alive your entire life becomes your iron tomb. The world was shut down. People weren't gathering out of fear of the virus. Events and businesses were being brought to a halt. Everybody was wearing masks and afraid of getting close to other people. This sounds familiar to all of us, but this wasn't 2020. This was 1952, the worst year on record for the polio epidemic. Polio has always been around, even depicted in ancient Egyptian tomb paintings. Every so often, a deadly outbreak leads to panic and fear, like in 1916 when 27,000 cases led to 6,000 deaths in the United States. Later, in 1949, just after World War II, the economy and life were slowly getting back to normal. Polio outbreaks started to crop up again all over the US and spread for the next few years. By 1952, there were over 50,000 cases, resulting in 3,145 deaths, while over 20,000 experienced one of the most terrifying symptoms of the disease, paralysis. When Paul Alexander, age 6, fell ill all of a sudden, his mother exclaimed, "Oh my God, not my son!" It was every mother's fear that their child would get the horrible virus that was spreading all over the country, including here in Dallas, Texas. Polio is caused by a highly infectious virus that invades the nervous system. Specifically, it targets the nerve cells in the spinal cord and brainstem that control muscle movement. Typically, it spreads through droplets from sneezing or coughing and fecal contamination. There was no cure, no vaccine, and most worrisome of all, it mainly attacked children. Paul had a high fever, and his muscles began shutting down one by one. First, his leg muscles gave out, preventing him from walking or standing, and after only 5 days, his diaphragm muscle grew so weak he couldn't breathe. Paul was rushed to the hospital, where the doctor declared him dead. His parents were in a state of shock, unable to accept that their little boy would be taken from them so suddenly. But it was another doctor who saw Paul's limp body and gave hope to the shaken-up parents. The doctor scooped Paul up and sprinted upstairs. He performed an emergency tracheotomy, hoping it would help Paul breathe. But Paul's lungs weren't taking in air. His diaphragm muscles were destroyed by the polio virus. So, wasting no time, they placed his head through the metal opening of a machine and slid his body inside, closing it up. His body, though paralyzed, could feel the air pushing in and out of the machine, pulling his lungs open so he could breathe. With oxygen filtering into his body, Paul woke up. But while the iron lung did keep death at bay, the machine demanded something from Paul in return: his life. Or at least, his old one, because despite everything, Paul would go on to create a new life still worth living, and accomplish things that no one had dreamed possible. Paul's situation at this point in his story makes you think about how many things in our lives seem to come with a catch. Even something that seems insignificant on its surface, like using free apps on your phone, can come at a significant cost. Many people don't realize that if something is free, it's likely because you're the product. And this video's sponsor, Incogni, has shown me how we're all being sold and who is buying. Take victims of virtual kidnap scams like Beth Royce, for example. She answered a phone call from her sister's number only to hear a man's voice demanding ransom money in exchange for her sister's life, as well as what sounded like her sister crying in the background. Beth later determined that her sister hadn't actually been kidnapped, but only after sending $1,000 to the scammer, who had digitally disguised his phone number as Beth's sister's and used AI-generated audio to impersonate her sister's voice. Most apps on your phone collect and store anything from browsing history and GPS location to private messages and calls. Then, these apps sell your personal information to companies called data brokers, who gather your info from multiple sources to create a full picture of who you are and then sell it to clients. Who can these clients be, you ask? Oh, just advertising agencies, law enforcement, scammers, stalkers, anyone really. Terrifying, isn't it? And there's nothing you can do about it. Until now, Incogni is here to get your data deleted from data broker databases. Incogni will automatically detect which brokers have records of you and send deletion requests on your behalf. They'll even send new additional requests whenever new records pop up. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code BREW60 at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. And help this channel keep bringing you more videos like this one. Link in description. Big thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video and bringing awareness to this problem, and at the same time, giving us a solution. Now, back to young Paul and his new iron lung. One might think that the iron lung is the name of a superhero, but it's a machine that is super in other ways. The technology for it was conceptualized as far back as 1670, but became widely used when Philip Drinker and Louis Shaw developed it in 1928. It's a ventilator that uses negative pressure in a cylinder to expand the lungs. When the negative pressure is released, the lungs contract on their own. For some, the paralysis was not permanent. Many children would be out of the iron lung within months or even weeks once their body adjusted to breathing again. But others, like Paul, weren't so lucky. Paul remained in the hospital for 18 months where he recovered from polio, but not the paralysis caused from it. His parents had no choice but to move him back home, still in the iron lung, in a truck with a generator. But at home, life was hardly back to normal. Paul couldn't play sports, go to church, or hang out with his friends. They didn't even come to visit either because they felt uncomfortable around him. It wasn't long after Paul contracted polio that the vaccine finally became available. It was a breath of relief for the entire world. In 1955, the vaccine was licensed, and by 1961, cases dropped to only 161 people in the country. A little too late for Paul, though, who now had to spend his entire life in the iron lung. Many saw the iron lung as a prison, but not him. While people often told him, "Paul, you can't do that," he would go on to accomplish things that would prove everybody wrong. Paul needed round-the-clock care. His caretakers fed and bathed him and helped him with his bedpans. The portholes on the side of the iron lung were designed with a seal so one could tend to him easier, like putting a blanket on or scratching an itch. Paul didn't like passing time watching TV, but instead preferred studying and reading. He had to adjust to holding a stick in his teeth to flip the pages. In his free time, he painted, clamping his teeth onto a paintbrush. With time, Paul worked with a physical therapist to develop an ability that allowed him to escape the iron lung for periods of a time. It took him about 1.5 years to learn a technique called glossopharyngeal breathing, also known as frog breathing, where he used muscles in his mouth and pharynx to gulp air into his lungs. It was a breath of fresh air for Paul, letting him leave the iron lung for a few hours to do things like going to a football game or spending time in nature, which he loved. But after a few hours, when he grew tired from the frog breathing, he had to return to the iron lung. Paul was homeschooled and learned how to take notes by memorizing. He was the first person to graduate with honors from a Dallas high school without ever attending class. His big dream was to be a lawyer, but when he tried to apply for university, they denied him, claiming his disability would get in the way of his studies. Paul wouldn't take no for an answer and pushed the university for 2 years until they finally caved on admitting him on 2 conditions: that he got the polio vaccine and that a fraternity took responsibility for him. Paul's dreams of being a lawyer came true after graduating from the University of Texas with his Juris Doctor in 1984 and passing the bar in 1986. Paul even started his own practice. He had a driver take him to court and to his office where he had another iron lung. When clients came into his office and saw him in the machine, they were always taken aback. Some even thought it was a tanning bed until he explained what it was. But his clients liked him because they realized that if he could become a lawyer despite his condition, he must have known what he was doing. And according to Paul himself, he was a damn good lawyer. But despite everything going well for Paul, he still had many struggles to face. Good caretakers are expensive and hard to come by. Now, in his 70s, Paul is retired, and having to deal with expensive medical bills, he's not as financially stable. To make matters worse, one of his recent caretakers took advantage of him, stealing his money. In response, Paul's friends set up a GoFundMe, raising over $135,000. Another worry for Paul is power failures, which he's had to deal with in the past. While most of us just light a candle and spend the night playing board games, it's a life or death scenario for Paul, since the machine keeping him alive needs a constant power supply. When an outage happens, he has to wait for someone to come in and use a hand pump on the machine. Otherwise, he'll pass out. Others have died from this tragic scenario, like Diane Odell, who passed away in 2008 when the backup generator didn't kick in. Unfortunately, the emergency hand pump didn't work on her iron lung. On top of all that, iron lungs are no longer made. Nowadays, doctors use positive pressure ventilators for polio instead, like the ones used during the COVID-19 pandemic. But using these ventilators is not a good option long term, as it requires intubation, where they place a tube down your trachea. For Paul, though, speaking and eating are a priority to continue his quality of life, so the iron lung is still the most suitable option for him. However, that means finding parts for the aging machine is becoming increasingly difficult, as is finding someone who can repair one. He became so desperate that he went to YouTube with the help of a friend to search for a mechanic. Paul struggled until Brady Richards, a mechanical engineer who restores hot rods, came to his aid. Currently, Paul has 4 iron lungs, some of which they use for parts. But even then, Brady still had to make some parts from scratch. Despite all these issues, Paul continues to amaze others with his vigor, humor, and a genuine spirit. He never sees himself as disabled. Wanting to share his story to inspire people, he wrote his autobiography on a computer with a pen attached to a stick to press the keys and move the mouse. While this was a struggle, occasionally a friend would help type, while Paul dictated. It took him more than 8 years, but his dedication prevailed, and he published his book in 2020. Paul even became a member of the Rotary Club, an organization dedicated to providing service to others, like their fight against polio. Even though in the 90s the Americas were declared polio-free, it still exists elsewhere in the world. Worried about another future outbreak and knowing more than anybody how horrible polio can be, Paul dedicates time to speak about disease prevention. Despite all of the challenges Paul has had to face, he has not only learned to live, but to excel at life. He hopes to be an inspiration to the world, saying that if he could do all of these incredible things, there's nothing stopping anybody else. It saddens us to report that while preparing to upload this video, news came out that on Monday, March 11th, 2024, Paul Alexander passed away at the age of 78. We would like to give our most sincere sympathy to his friends and family. Based on his interviews and words from people that knew him, it is obvious to us that Paul was an extraordinary man who was not defined by the hardship that life threw his way, but by the challenges he overcame. In his own words, "I can't say that I'm glad that I caught polio, but I am glad that I developed these skills, the knowledge, the abilities that polio demanded of me, and I feel like I accomplished more than if I had lived without it."